Hey, good morning, everyone. So thanks for joining us, and happy to be kicking these teaching bites off. Um, and so this is a new deal for me. I normally don't video myself, but I'm excited to get started and hope these are helpful for you. Today we're going to be talking about teaching reading, and we'll just do kind of a general overview. Later on, we'll break into these ideas to a greater extent and play with them a bit more. So today we're just doing an overview, and we want to talk about um, how do we teach reading. So years ago, when I first began teaching, we started thinking about, well, how do you break into reading? How do you help people learn to read or love to read? And some things that we heard or they told us was, well, look at what the students are like, learn about the students, and then plug them in to something that works well for them. Look at their learning styles and give them books or give them things that will attract their attention. Um, Read to them, start easy, um, assess their ability, and make sure that what you're asking them to do is accessible to them and doable to them. And then test vocabulary and comprehension. And so often I struggle with this because these didn't feel like mechanics. And in a school curriculum, I may not be able to choose things that the students are like. I may not have access to something um, that the student would just naturally gravitate towards, or I may not be able to assess them in a way that would match their learning style. Some of that is already created for me. It's already defined in a school district or in a curriculum that I don't build. Then I have less control over. So some of this just didn't seem to work. And so I began to look at other ways of thinking about how do we actually teach reading, regardless of whether the student likes the reading or is enjoying it, or if it's technical, applying to maybe more advanced learning and not reading just for joy. How do we help a student access a text and think about it and understand it? And I came up with the idea that it's more about helping the student understand how their mind is processing what they're looking at. And so begin to think about how do we teach vocabulary and how do we teach main ideas and support, relationships, inferences, purposes. And so this will really just break down into 10 sections where we'll think about how are we processing what's on the page. We'll look at kind of authorial intent. So what did the author intend to do? What's going on in the author's mind with what is being presented? How can we understand that so that we know where the author is trying to take us? And so reading becomes more process oriented. And so that's what we'll start with. First, let me just overview the reading processes that we'll talk about today. We'll look at dictionary use, vocabulary in context, looking at main ideas and supporting ideas, implied main ideas. We'll look at different relationships, inferences, purposes, and tone, argument, and critical reading. And this is a whole lot of stuff. We won't go into much depth about any of these things. I'll introduce these concepts, and then later on we'll come back and we'll devote maybe a session or 2 or 3 sessions to these issues. So first we want to think about using the dictionary, and I think this is a big concept throughout education. Do we allow students to use a dictionary, or to what extent can they use a dictionary? When can they use a dictionary? Can they use it on a test, or can they use it at home? How do we control it, and what's the impact? So I think maybe what's important to think about is, yes, the dictionary can be helpful in a lot of ways, especially when the students are beginning with language. But even for native speakers, we use a dictionary and it's helpful. Um, and there's things we can learn about words from a dictionary that can be really helpful. So we have to think about how to teach that. The problem with the dictionary, especially with emerging language learners, is they may choose the wrong word and they just don't know enough about the language to pick the right word. And so even in this image, there's several words that are really, really close, and someone who may not be able to differentiate well may pick the wrong word, use it incorrectly, and just cause more confusion. And so maybe a better way of going about that is to think about how do we look at vocabulary within its context, the word in its place. And so there's several ways, several things that we can think about how do we situate a word within its sentence, within the phrase that it's in, or within the paragraph or the collection of sentences that it's in. How does that word connect with the main ideas and the thoughts that the author is putting forward? And so this process is a bit more complex. Getting students to really reflect on that helps them to kind of understand better meaning. You're getting into deeper comprehension here. And so within the English language, where one word may have 20 or 30 different definitions, vocabulary and context becomes a critical skill for the students. And so there's a couple of ways to kind of help think about how do we situate words in a context. And we'll get to that later on. Next skill or process we want to think about is main ideas. And I like to think about this as what is the author shooting for? What is his or her point? And so some authors are not so friendly. They don't present those in the first sentence or even in the middle sentence. Sometimes they don't present those emphatically at all. They're just perhaps an arrow in the dark that we're supposed to pick up on. And these are our implied main ideas, and they're hidden. We're not exactly sure where they are. Maybe they don't exist, but if we think about them, we can find them. And so understanding how to decode main ideas as a process really aids in our reading, and it'll help with a variety of things, but it is a fundamental. If students can't find the main idea accurately, well, then it's really difficult for them to understand what's being presented. We understand main ideas often through what is being supported. And so helping students kind of differentiate main idea from the supporting idea, but understand how things are supported and what is adequate support. And that when an author supports their ideas well, some really beautiful, complex ideas can emerge. And so enabling the student to see how the text unfolds, how it maybe outlines and how it kind of sticks together is a critical learning component for reading. Next, we want to think about relationships. What are the relationships between those ideas? And so we have main ideas, but how do the supporting ideas, how do they connect to those main ideas? And where are they leading us? And so these are the relationships. Often they're time, they can be causal, they can be effect, they can be correlations. There's a variety of different type of relationships. But if we can teach the students to look for the relationships between the ideas and how we're connecting those ideas, this can be a critical place for them to understand better what's going on. So what we're really shooting for here is comprehension. How do we measure comprehension? And what are we looking for? This becomes ways of, often we want to be able to give direct kind of objective feedback. And so if we can look at these kind of elements, this allows us to give better feedback, more direct, and understand too exactly what the student may be comprehending. Inferences are these things that are much more subtle, kind of like an implied main idea. And the inferences are those things that connect and lie behind the main idea and the support. We have to kind of guess at it, and it's maybe the assumptions that the author holds. And the author may be presenting ideas to us subtly. And as we read them, we get them if we're astute readers. However, we often have to kind of guess at what the author is pushing, what idea is being presented. And these are the inferences. And so being able to understand those subtleties within the text is a much deeper meaning, much more complex idea, especially for emerging readers. Another more complex idea is looking at tone and purpose. And we often see this. We talk to students about voice within a writing and having character and a writing having some kind of embodiment. So tone and purpose are these kind of, is often where we see those things lodged. Tone, in this first picture here, we see the gentleman has a tone, and it tells us something about him. Text also has kind of a tone, and we want to understand and be able to grasp that tone and see where it's leading us, what it's bringing, what knowledge it's bringing to the table. Purpose is more about, why is the author writing? What's his overall objective? Whereas main idea is what he's writing about. It's the topic. Why purpose is more about this other kind of intention. What does he want us or she want us to do with this information? What is their hope from us reading it? An argument is really interesting. Sometimes we say, well, it's just a humorous piece, or it's just literature, or it's there's no real argument. However, that's probably not the case. Most authors have a purpose for writing, and they have a view that they're presenting, and that's often carries some bias. It carries some understandings, and so if the reader can understand that, if they can grasp that and say, okay, this is the argument, this is the position that the author has taken, then they can see how the author is supporting it, how the author understands the situation, and they can make intelligent decisions about the piece because they understand the piece as an argument. And it may be cloaked as a narrative, it may be cloaked as a comic, or humor, but there's this position, there's an underlying statement that's kind of there that the author is pushing forward, and so understanding that becomes really critical. After we've done all those things, and we've gotten pretty good at them, then we can start thinking about reading things for underlying pieces, and this is our critical analysis. We can do Freudian or Jung analysis, or we can do feminist analysis, structural analysis. So there's any number of different types of critical readings that can be done of a text. But we need those basic fundamental types processes in place for us to successfully critically read a text and get to maybe the meat of what the text says outside of what an author may impose based on social structures, political structures, and how people will read and understand the text. So these are 10 different processes to think about as we teach reading. With emergent readers, we're probably not going to cover all 10, but we can cover some. And as readers become more adept, then we can get into more, add new ideas. We can challenge the reader to think about things in new ways, um, and get into some real analysis of what is written and how it may impact our lives. I think when we get into the critical analysis, this is when students really tune into reading because it becomes meaningful to them. They can make sense of a passage, they can make sense of a work, and they can apply it in new ways. And so even if something has been a bit boring or dry, when they can break it apart into units and pieces and understand it, students enjoy it. They enjoy using their mind. And so I encourage you to comment, think about these things. Let me know which ideas you're most interested in. Uh, Thursday, we'll start looking at dictionary use and how successfully to use the dictionary and perhaps when. Um, so let me know what you think, and thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Have a great day.